Hello, everyone. If you discovered a sunken enemy nuclear submarine, holding secrets that could change the balance of global power, but it lay 3 miles beneath the ocean surface, deeper than anything ever recovered, what would you risk to get it? Project Azorian, the secret mission to raise a sunken Soviet submarine. The cold, dark waters of the North Pacific are unforgiving, a vast and churning expanse that has swallowed ships and secrets for millennia. In the frigid spring of 1968, it was poised to claim another. On March 8th, the Soviet Golf II-class ballistic missile submarine K-129, patrol designation Foxtrot, failed to make its scheduled radio check-in. In the paranoid, high-stakes calculus of the Cold War, silence was rarely a good sign. A massive Soviet search and rescue operation swung into action, a fleet of ships and aircraft scouring a huge swath of ocean, but they were looking in the wrong place. They found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no trace of the 98 souls aboard. For Moscow, the K-129 had simply vanished, but it had not gone unheard. Thousands of miles away in top-secret US Navy listening posts, the ears of the ocean had picked up a faint, final acoustic signature. The Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, a clandestine network of hydrophones laid across the seabed, had registered a series of catastrophic, concussive events consistent with a submarine imploding as it plunged past its crushed depth. American analysts, using the advanced triangulation methods of the time, were able to narrow down the location of this acoustic event to a relatively small search box, a 600-square-mile patch of abyssal plain roughly 1,560 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii. The Soviets were searching thousands of miles away, completely unaware that their adversary not only knew what had happened, but had a startlingly precise idea of where the wreckage lay. The intelligence prize was almost unimaginable. A Soviet ballistic missile submarine was a self-contained capsule of the Kremlin's most sensitive military technology. On board were 3 R-21 SSN-5 SARC nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes, cutting-edge sonar and communications equipment, and most valuable of all, the cryptographic machines and codebooks that would unlock the secrets of Soviet naval communications. To recover such a prize would be the intelligence coup of the century. The problem was the depth. The K-129 rested on the seabed at a staggering 16,500 feet, over 3 miles down. The pressure at that depth is nearly 7,500 pounds per square inch, an environment more hostile and inaccessible than the surface of the moon. Nothing of that size had ever been recovered or even contemplated for recovery from such a depth. The technical challenges were monumental, bordering on the impossible. In the clandestine halls of the Central Intelligence Agency, however, impossible was often just the starting point for a new operation. The National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, was briefed, and he in turn took the proposal to President Richard Nixon. The potential reward, they agreed, was worth the immense risk and astronomical cost. The directive was given: find a way. The mission, codenamed Project Azorian, was born. It would become the most complex, expensive, and audacious covert operation of the entire Cold War, a technological gamble of breathtaking ambition, all hidden behind the most elaborate cover story ever conceived. The first step was to confirm the exact location and condition of the wreck. For this, the Navy dispatched its most specialized asset, the USS Halibut, a unique nuclear submarine retrofitted for deep-sea search and special operations. Arriving on station in July 1968, the Halibut deployed its Fish, a 12-foot-long, 2-ton remotely operated vehicle towed on a 20,000-foot cable and packed with cameras, strobes, and sonar. For weeks, the crew painstakingly mowed the lawn, dragging the fish back and forth across the target area. The tension in the control room was palpable as they stared at the grainy black and white images being relayed from the crushing darkness below. Then, after 22,000 photographs, they found it. The images were haunting. The K-129 was broken but largely intact. A long gash scarred its hull behind the sail, but the forward two-thirds of the submarine containing the missile tubes and the coveted code room appeared to have survived the plunge. It rested silently on the muddy bottom, a ghost of the Cold War, waiting. The photographs confirmed the prize was there. Now the CIA had to invent a way to go and get it. The challenge laid before the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology was unlike any other. This wasn't about planting a bug or recruiting an agent. This was deep ocean engineering on a scale that had never been attempted. A fusion of marine salvage, oil drilling technology, and clandestine spycraft. How do you build a system capable of descending 3 miles, latching onto a 1,750-ton, decaying submarine hull with surgical precision, and lifting it back to the surface without it breaking apart, all while remaining completely undetected by the ever-watchful Soviet Navy? Early concepts were wild, ranging from using massive flotation balloons to employing powerful deep-sea submersibles. All were deemed impractical or too risky. The solution that gradually emerged was as audacious as it was brilliant. It would require a custom-built ship, a vessel so large and so unique that its very existence would attract attention. This led to the second, equally critical challenge: creating a plausible cover story. The operation needed a public-facing justification for building and operating such a bizarre ship in the middle of the Pacific for months on end. The answer was found in the burgeoning and somewhat obscure field of deep-sea mining. The plan was to claim that the ship was designed to harvest manganese nodules from the seabed. These potato-sized polymetallic concretions were known to litter the abyssal plains and were, at the time, seen as a potential future source of valuable metals like manganese, nickel, and cobalt. It was a perfect cover. It explained the need for a large, stable vessel, a heavy-duty lifting mechanism, and operations in the very depths where the K-129 lay. To add an impenetrable layer of credibility and mystique, the CIA needed a commercial partner, someone so wealthy, eccentric, and reclusive that his involvement would deflect scrutiny and silence questions. There was only one man who fit the bill: Howard Hughes. The billionaire aviation tycoon and industrialist was already a living legend, known for his secrecy and his involvement in government projects. The CIA approached him, and Hughes, a fervent anti-communist and patriot, agreed to lend his name and his company, the Summa Corporation, to the cause. The public story would be that Hughes was embarking on a pioneering, if wildly expensive, venture into ocean mining. The ship at the heart of this deception was to be the Hughes Glomar Explorer. Its design was revolutionary. Constructed in secret at the Sun Shipbuilding Yard in Pennsylvania, it was a 619-foot-long, 50,000-ton behemoth that looked like no other ship on Earth. Its most prominent feature was a massive, 200-foot-tall derrick, similar to an oil rig, positioned in the center. But its true secret was hidden from view. The ship was built around a vast internal bay, a 200-foot-long, 74-foot-wide, and 65-foot-high chamber in the hull, known as the moon pool. This cavernous space could be opened to the sea through a pair of enormous sliding gates on the ship's bottom. The entire recovery operation would take place within the moon pool, hidden from spy satellites and prying eyes. A heavy lift system stabilized by a state-of-the-art gimbal and swell compensators to counteract the ocean's motion would lower and raise the recovery tool through the moon pool. This system was designed to keep the entire lifting apparatus, known as the pipe string, almost perfectly stationary relative to the seabed, even as the ship above pitched and rolled in the Pacific swells. The pipe string itself was an engineering marvel, consisting of hundreds of 60-foot sections of specialized steel pipe that would be assembled one by one to reach the 16,500-foot depth. It had to be strong enough to support the immense weight of the submarine section, yet flexible enough to withstand the dynamic forces of the ocean. Within this pipe, cables and control lines would run to the business end of the operation, the capture vehicle. The capture vehicle, the device that would actually grapple the submarine, was the mission's technological soul. Officially, it was designated the capture vehicle, but the crews would later affectionately nickname it Clementine. It was, in essence, a colossal, remotely operated claw, a piece of machinery so specialized and complex it pushed the boundaries of 1970s engineering. Designed and built in secrecy by Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, the same minds behind the U-2 spy plane and Polaris missiles, Clementine was a monster born of necessity. It measured roughly 40 feet by 30 feet, a sprawling steel arachnid weighing hundreds of tons. Its primary purpose was to descend to the abyssal floor, align itself perfectly over the targeted forward section of the K-129, and secure it for the long lift to the surface. The design had to account for the fragile state of the decaying submarine, which had been subjected to a catastrophic implosion and 6 years of corrosion in the crushing saline deep. A crude grappling hook would simply tear the hull to pieces. Clementine had to be both immensely strong and surprisingly delicate. Its main structure consisted of a large, boxy central hull from which 8 massive articulating legs or tines protruded. These tines, controlled by powerful hydraulic systems, were designed to slide underneath the submarine's hull from both sides, cradling it in a secure grip. At the ends of these primary tines were smaller, more precise grappling claws to provide additional stability and grip onto specific structural points of the submarine. The entire apparatus was a symphony of hydraulic rams, steel hinges, and reinforced plating, all designed to operate flawlessly under pressures that would instantly crush a lesser machine. Clementine was not a blind instrument. It was equipped with an array of high-resolution television cameras, powerful deep-sea lights, and advanced sonar systems, including side-scan and forward-looking sonar. These sensors would provide the operators in the Glomar Explorer's control room, 3 miles above, with the eyes they needed to guide the vehicle into position. The control room itself was a space-age marvel for its time, filled with consoles, joysticks, and video monitors displaying the feeds from Clementine's cameras. A team of highly skilled operators would fly the capture vehicle during its final approach, a process requiring immense concentration and skill, akin to performing remote surgery on a patient at the bottom of the Grand Canyon using a miles-long instrument. The power and control signals were fed from the ship down to Clementine through a thick umbilical cable bundled with the pipe string. This connection was the vehicle's lifeline, providing the electricity to run its lights, cameras, and hydraulic pumps, and relaying a constant stream of telemetry and video back to the surface. The entire system was a closed loop of command and control, a tethered, robotic extension of the will of the men in the control room. The construction and testing of Clementine were conducted under a cloak of absolute secrecy in a massive, specially constructed floating barge in Redwood City, California. This barge, the HMB-1, Hughes mining barge, was itself a key part of the deception. It had a retractable roof that allowed Clementine to be worked on out of sight of Soviet spy satellites. The public story was that the HMB-1 was being used to build and test the underwater mining equipment. Once completed, Clementine would be submerged. The HMB-1 would be towed out to sea to rendezvous with the Glomar Explorer, and the capture vehicle would be transferred to the ship's moon pool underwater, a clandestine exchange that would never be seen from the surface. The sheer scale of the engineering was staggering. Every component, from the largest hydraulic ram on Clementine to the smallest bolt on the pipe string, had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. A single failed valve or a fractured weld could doom the entire multi-hundred-million-dollar operation and send the priceless intelligence prize tumbling back into the abyss forever. As the ship was being built on the East Coast and the Claw on the West, the CIA was carefully assembling the human component of this audacious plan. Assembling the crew for Project Azorian was as complex as designing the hardware. This was not a standard naval or commercial marine assignment. It was a deep black covert operation with a technological core. The mission required a unique blend of skills: seasoned mariners to run the ship, roughneck drillers to handle the pipe string, brilliant engineers to operate the sophisticated lifting and capture systems, and woven amongst them all, a cadre of CIA officers to maintain security and oversee the intelligence-gathering aspects of the mission. The total complement aboard the Hughes Glomar Explorer would be around 170 men. Each one was hand-picked and subjected to an exhaustive vetting process. Their backgrounds were scoured, their families investigated, and their psychological profiles analyzed. The agency needed individuals who were not only experts in their fields, but also stable, disciplined, and capable of keeping the biggest secret of their lives. They had to endure months of isolation in the middle of the Pacific, working long, grueling hours under immense pressure, all while maintaining the fiction that they were part of a commercial mining venture. To the outside world, and even to their own families, they were employees of Howard Hughes' Summer Corporation, or Global Marine Development, the company that operated the ship. They were given cover stories and strict instructions not to discuss the true nature of their work with anyone. Mail was censored, and communication with the outside world was virtually non-existent. The ship became its own secret, self-contained world. The CIA personnel on board, operating under the guise of company representatives or technicians, were responsible for mission oversight. They were the link back to headquarters in Langley, though communication was kept to a bare minimum to avoid detection. Their primary job was to ensure the operational security of the mission, handle any unexpected contingencies, and, most importantly, manage the final phase of the operation: the analysis of whatever was brought up from the depths. Life aboard the Glomar Explorer was a study in controlled monotony punctuated by intense, highly technical work. The ship was dry, no alcohol was permitted, a standard practice on such high-stakes missions to ensure clear heads and prevent loose lips. The men worked in shifts, around the clock. The drillers, many of them veterans of offshore oil rigs, managed the pipe shop, the automated system that added a new 60-foot section of pipe to the string every 10-15 minutes. It was heavy, repetitive, and dangerous work, requiring a deep understanding of the immense forces at play. In the ship's control center, the engineers and technicians monitored the dozens of screens and gauges that displayed the health of the lifting system, the status of Clementine, and the conditions of the deep ocean. The atmosphere in the control room was one of quiet, focused intensity, especially as the mission progressed. The crew was well fed and had access to recreational facilities, including a gym and a movie theater, to combat the psychological strain of long-term isolation. Yet the underlying tension was ever present. They all knew what they were really there for. They knew they were being watched by the Soviets, whose trawlers, often packed with electronic surveillance gear, would periodically shadow their vessel, testing the credibility of their cover story. Every action, every radio transmission, Every piece of refuse jettisoned from the ship had to be consistent with a deep-sea mining operation. There were drills for every contingency. What to do if a Soviet vessel came too close, how to respond to a helicopter overflight, and the protocols for scuttling the most sensitive equipment and documents in the event of an imminent boarding. The secrecy extended even to the project's finances, which were laundered through the Department of Defense budget and Hughes's own corporate structures to hide the massive expenditure, estimated to be over $350 million, the equivalent of nearly $2 billion today. As the Glomar Explorer and the HMB-1 completed their sea trials and preparations in the spring of 1974, the hand-picked crew made their final farewells to their families, armed with their cover stories and the heavy burden of the truth. They were sailing not in search of manganese nodules but into the heart of the Cold War, on a mission to steal a secret from the bottom of the world. On June 20th, 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer slipped its moorings in Long Beach, California, and headed west into the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Its departure was noted but not considered extraordinary. It was, after all, the public launch of Howard Hughes's ambitious and eccentric deep-sea mining project. A few weeks later, the HMB-1 barge, with Clementine hidden securely in its belly, was towed out from Redwood City. The two vessels rendezvoused in the quiet, secluded waters off the coast of Catalina Island. Here, one of the most critical and clandestine phases of the operation took place. The HMB-1 partially submerged itself, its roof retracted, and the Glomar Explorer maneuvered carefully over it. Divers connected the two vessels, and in a complex underwater ballet, the colossal Clementine was transferred from the barge into the ship's moon pool. The HMB-1 then disengaged and was towed away, its primary mission complete. The entire transfer occurred beneath the waves, invisible to any passing ships or overhead satellites. With its precious cargo now secured, the Glomar Explorer set a course for the target location, a desolate patch of ocean designated Site G. The voyage itself was a masterclass in maintaining a cover. The crew feigned the activities of a mining survey, occasionally stopping to lower test equipment or conduct seismic surveys to sell the story. The real tension, however, came from the ever-present threat of Soviet surveillance. The Kremlin, while unaware of the true mission, was deeply suspicious of any advanced American technological activity at sea. As predicted, Soviet vessels began to take an interest. The first to arrive was a Soviet Navy tug, the SB-10, which shadowed the Glomar Explorer for days, observing its operations from a distance. Later, the more formidable Soviet missile-range instrumentation ship, the Chajma, arrived on the scene. Its decks bristled with antennas and radar domes, and its purpose was clear: to monitor and gather intelligence on this strange American vessel. The CIA crew aboard the Glomar Explorer went into a carefully rehearsed routine. They communicated with the Soviet ships via radio, politely but firmly stating their purpose as a commercial mining operation and warning them to keep a safe distance. On board, life continued with a veneer of normalcy. The crew sunbathed on deck and engaged in casual activities, all for the benefit of the powerful long-range cameras on the Soviet ships. Helicopters from the Chajma occasionally flew over, and the American crew would wave, playing their roles to perfection. Below decks, however, the mood was entirely different. In the hidden control rooms and secure compartments, the real work continued under a state of high alert. Every Soviet maneuver was tracked, every radio frequency monitored. The CIA officers knew that a single mistake, a single transmission that broke character, could expose the entire operation. The psychological pressure mounted daily. The men were acutely aware that they were the focal point of a silent, high-stakes confrontation between two superpowers in one of the most remote places on Earth. Finally, on the 4th of July, 1974, The Hughes Glomar Explorer arrived at Site G. It was time. The ship's powerful thrusters and dynamic positioning system engaged, holding the massive vessel in a fixed position over the coordinates where the K-129 lay waiting in the crushing dark. The order was given to commence the recovery. The massive steel doors of the moon pool rumbled open, revealing the dark, churning water below. The time for deception and transit was over. The most difficult and dangerous phase of Project Azorian was about to begin. The 3-mile descent into the abyss to claim its prize. The Soviet ships watched, their crews likely baffled by the strange preparations they were witnessing, never imagining the sheer audacity of what was happening right under their noses. The process of lowering the capture vehicle was a slow, deliberate, and agonizingly long marathon of heavy engineering. It was not a simple matter of dropping a hook on a line. The 3-mile-long pipe string had to be assembled piece by piece in the ship's derrick. Each 60-foot section of high-strength steel pipe, weighing several tons, was lifted into place by an automated handling system, threaded onto the section below it, and torqued to precise specifications. Then, the entire string, now 60 feet longer and several tons heavier, was lowered by the massive hydraulic lift system. This process was repeated over and over, 24 hours a day, in a relentless cycle of mechanical precision. The drill crew, or roughnecks, worked in grueling shifts, their experience from oil fields proving invaluable. The noise in the derrick area was deafening, a constant clang and whir of heavy machinery. Yet this cacophony was the sound of progress. Each newly added pipe section another small victory in the slow-motion invasion of the deep. Days began to blur into one another. It took approximately 4 days of continuous work just to lower the pipe string and Clementine to the seabed. For the men in the ship's central control room, this was a period of intense and mounting tension. They watched their instruments, monitoring the strain on the pipe string, the stability of the ship's position, and the status of Clementine's systems. The ship's dynamic positioning system was working flawlessly, using its powerful thrusters to counteract wind and currents, keeping the Glomar Explorer virtually motionless over the target. The gimbaled platform and swell compensators beneath the derrick absorbed the roll and pitch of the ship, ensuring that the pipe string hung almost perfectly vertical, a fragile steel thread connecting their world to the abyss. Finally, the sonar altimeters indicated that Clementine was approaching the seafloor. The operators in the control room now took center stage. The powerful deep sea lights were switched on, piercing the absolute blackness for the first time in millions of years. On the video monitors, the murky, silt-covered terrain of the abyssal plain resolved into view. It was a desolate, alien landscape. Using the vehicle's own thrusters for fine maneuvering, the operators began the final search, flying Clementine just above the seabed. They were guided by the original coordinates from the USS Halibut survey 6 years prior. But finding a specific object in the vast, featureless expanse was still a challenge. Then, a shape emerged from the gloom. It was unmistakably the wreck of the K-129. The control room fell silent, the only sound the quiet hum of electronics. The men stared at the screens, transfixed by the ghostly image. The submarine was covered in a fine layer of silt, its steel hull streaked with rust. It was a tomb, a monument to a Cold War tragedy, and now, the target of their audacious heist. The operators began a slow, careful survey, guiding Clementine around the wreck. The images relayed to the surface were surreal and chilling. They could see the gash in the hull aft of the sail, the empty missile tubes where the caps had been blown off, and the silent, imposing structure of the conning tower. The forward section, their primary target, appeared to be in relatively stable condition, though its structural integrity was a complete unknown. The time had come. the operators began the final, delicate approach. Using joysticks and a complex array of controls, they maneuvered the massive capture vehicle directly over the forward third of the submarine. This was the most critical moment of the descent. The slightest miscalculation could cause Clementine to collide with the wreck, potentially damaging it beyond recovery, or even entangling the claw. Foot by foot, with painstaking slowness, they lowered Clementine into position. On the screens, the massive steel tines of the capture vehicle loomed over the doomed submarine, ready to embrace it. The entire mission, years of planning and hundreds of millions of dollars, had come down to this single, precise maneuver, 3 miles beneath the waves. The atmosphere in the control room of the Glomar Explorer was electric with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The world outside their sealed environment ceased to exist. There was only the ship, the control panels, and the ghostly images being fed from the seabed 3 miles below. The operators, with sweat beading on their foreheads, meticulously guided Clementine into its final position. The main tines of the capture vehicle were aligned on either side of the K-129's hull, hovering just above the silty bottom. On the command of the mission director, the hydraulic systems were engaged. Slowly, with immense power, the massive steel fingers began to close, sliding through the soft mud and sediment beneath the submarine. On the video monitors, they watched as the tines enveloped the forward section of the wreck, a mechanical embrace designed to be both firm and gentle. Smaller, secondary claws were then activated to grip specific hard points on the hull for added stability. Sonar sensors and strain gauges relayed a constant stream of data to the surface, confirming that the claw had a secure purchase. For the first time, the recovery system was bearing the weight of the target, an estimated 1,000 tons for the forward section alone. The command was given to begin the lift. The massive hydraulic heavy lift system aboard the Glomar Explorer engaged, its pumps whining as they began to draw the pipe string upwards. The process was incredibly slow, measured in feet per hour. Every single component of the system was now under immense strain. The pipe string, the derrick, the gimbal platform, and most critically, the tines of Clementine and the decaying hull of the submarine itself. Days passed. The pipe string was brought up section by section in a reverse of the deployment process. Each 60-foot length was detached, cleaned, and stored, bringing the prize ever closer to the surface. The men worked with a relentless, focused energy, fueled by adrenaline and the proximity of their goal. Throughout the lift, the Soviet spy ship Chazma and the tug SB-10 remained on the horizon, silent observers of an operation whose true nature they could still not comprehend. The crew of the Glomar Explorer maintained their cover, performing routine tasks on deck as if this were just another day in the deep-sea mining business. But below decks, all eyes were on the monitors, watching the depth gauge for Clementine slowly decrease. They were more than halfway there. The submarine had been lifted over 9,000 feet from the ocean floor when disaster struck. Without any warning, a catastrophic failure occurred. The video monitors in the control room suddenly filled with a chaotic scene of swirling debris and mud. Multiple strain gauges on Clementine simultaneously redlined and then flatlined. A sickening realization washed over the crew. Something had broken. Later analysis would suggest that several of the grappling tines on one side of Clementine had failed. The immense weight of the submarine section, combined with the unknown stresses within its corroded hull, proved to be too much. As the tines gave way, the delicate balance of the lift was destroyed. The K-129, or at least a significant portion of it, tore free from the claw's grip. The men in the control room watched in horror as the main prize, the section of the hull containing the missile silos and the code room, broke away and began its final, unstoppable plunge back into the abyss. It tumbled end over end, disintegrating as it fell, a ghost returning to its grave. The control room was filled with stunned silence, the air thick with the bitter taste of failure. Years of effort, a fortune in resources, and an unprecedented technological gamble had ended in a partial, heartbreaking loss. The primary intelligence targets were gone, lost forever in the crushing darkness. The catastrophic failure of the capture vehicle sent a shockwave of despair through the Glomar Explorer's crew. The main objective, the treasure trove of cryptographic equipment and nuclear missiles, was gone. For a few agonizing moments, it seemed the entire audacious project had been for nothing, But as the cloud of silt and debris on the video feeds began to clear, a new image emerged on the screens. Clementine was not entirely empty. A portion of the submarine, a jagged 38-foot-long section from the very bow, remained firmly in the claw's surviving grasp. It was a fraction of what they had hoped for, but it was not nothing. The lift was immediately and carefully resumed. The mood had shifted from triumphant anticipation to grim, salvage-like determination. They would bring up what they had. A few days later, Clementine, bearing its hard-won and tragically small prize, finally reached the surface and was drawn up into the cavernous, shielded space of the moon pool. The massive doors on the ship's hull slid shut, sealing the operation from the outside world. For the first time, the recovered piece of the K-129 was exposed to the air, dripping with seawater under the harsh lights of the enclosed bay. The CIA personnel on board, clad in protective gear, immediately went to work. The recovered section was the forwardmost part of the bow. While it did not contain the code room or the ballistic missiles, it was far from worthless. It held 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, and the forward compartments could still yield valuable intelligence about Soviet submarine construction techniques, metallurgy, and acoustic signature characteristics. The most somber discovery, however, was human. Inside the wreckage, the recovery team found the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. Their bodies were carefully and respectfully removed. The CIA, in a secret gesture of respect for a fallen adversary, made the decision to give them a formal burial at sea. Weeks later, with the Soviet spy ship still lurking nearby, a small, clandestine ceremony was held on the deck of the Glomar Explorer. The ship's captain and a CIA deputy director read prayers for the dead, first in English, then in Russian, from a translated funeral service. The 6 bodies, each sewn into a weighted canvas shroud, were committed to the deep. The entire service was filmed on a silent 8mm camera to provide proof, should the day ever come, that the remains had been treated with honor. This act, hidden within one of the Cold War's most audacious intelligence operations, was a moment of quiet humanity amid the cynical calculus of espionage. It was a secret held as tightly as the mission itself. With the analysis of the bow section complete and the torpedoes secured, the Glomar Explorer concluded its work at Site G. The crew disassembled the pipe string for the last time, secured Clementine in the moon pool, and began the long voyage home. They had succeeded in performing an unprecedented feat of engineering, lifting an object from a depth of over 3 miles. But they had failed to capture their primary prize. Project Azorian was a partial success and a partial failure, a story of incredible technological achievement marred by a final heartbreaking accident. The secret, however, was still safe. The Soviets knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. The world remained oblivious. The crew of the Glomar Explorer sailed home, bound by their oaths of secrecy, carrying with them the memory of what they had seen and the knowledge of the 6 souls they had returned to the sea. The question now was how long the secret could possibly be held. The Hughes Glomar Explorer returned to port. its mission complete, its secrets intact. The CIA began the process of debriefing the crew and mothballing the incredible hardware that had been created for the one-of-a-kind operation. The official story held. Howard Hughes's deep-sea mining venture had concluded its initial survey phase. For a time, it seemed as if the secret of Project Azorian would be kept forever, relegated to classified government archives. But in the politically turbulent mid-1970s, an era defined by the Watergate scandal and a new skepticism towards government secrecy, keeping such a massive secret was becoming increasingly difficult. The first thread to unravel came from an unexpected place. In June 1974, just before the Glomar Explorer began its recovery operation, the Los Angeles headquarters of the Summa Corporation, Howard Hughes' own company, was burglarized. The thieves made off with a trove of documents, among which was a short, cryptic memo to Hughes from a CIA official, referencing their cooperation on a project involving the Glomar Explorer. The thieves, attempting to extort money from Hughes, did not initially understand the memo's significance. But when their demands were not met, the documents began to circulate in the criminal underworld. The story of the burglary and the mysterious memo eventually reached investigative journalists. The first major break came in February 1975 when the Los Angeles Times published a front-page story by reporter Jack Nelson, piecing together the puzzle. The story alleged that the Glomar Explorer's mining mission was an elaborate cover for a secret CIA operation to raise a sunken Soviet submarine. The initial report was stunning, but it lacked official confirmation. Other news outlets, including the New York Times and journalist Seymour Hersh, began digging into the story, corroborating details and adding new ones. The CIA, desperate to contain the leak, took the extraordinary step of directly contacting news editors across the country. The director of Central Intelligence, William Colby, personally called editors at the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the major television networks. He implored them to kill the story, arguing that its publication would cause a major international incident with the Soviet Union and compromise sensitive intelligence methods. He didn't deny the story. He simply stated that national security was at stake. In a remarkable, and today almost unimaginable act of self-censorship in the name of national security, many of the news organizations agreed to hold back. They sat on one of the biggest scoops of the decade. However, the secret was too big to contain. Smaller publications and radio commentator Jack Anderson, who were not part of Colby's appeal, ran with the story. Once the initial details were public, the major outlets felt they could no longer hold back. On March 18, 1975, the dam broke. The Los Angeles Times published a detailed 4-page account of Project Azorian, and the rest of the media followed suit. The story of the secret mission, the Howard Hughes cover, and the colossal claw became an international sensation. The public was captivated by the sheer, Bond villain-level audacity of the CIA's plan. The leak created a new problem for the government: how to respond to media and public inquiries about this now public secret. The result was the birth of a classic piece of government jargon. When journalists filed Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests for documents related to the Glomar Explorer, the CIA responded that they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of such records. This novel legal response, designed to avoid both lying and compromising classified information, became known as the Glomar response and has been used by government agencies ever since to fend off inquiries into sensitive matters. The public revelation of Project Azorian marked the end of an era. The immense cost, the partial failure, and the ultimate exposure of the mission led to congressional investigations and a re-evaluation of the scale and risk of such covert operations. The fallout from the public exposure of Project Azorian was complex and multifaceted. Internationally, the Kremlin was publicly furious but privately embarrassed. The mission revealed that the United States possessed the capability to pinpoint the location of sunken Soviet submarines, a significant blow to the perceived invulnerability of their nuclear deterrent. It also confirmed that the US had attempted to steal their most advanced military secrets from right under their noses. Moscow issued a diplomatic protest, but their response was relatively muted, likely to avoid drawing further attention to their own security failures and the loss of the K-129. Domestically, the story fueled the ongoing debate about the power and accountability of the intelligence community. The Senate's Church Committee and the House's Pike Committee, both established to investigate intelligence abuses, delved into the details of Azorian. They questioned the cost, the legality, and the wisdom of such a high-risk operation. While many were in awe of the technical achievement, others saw it as a prime example of a rogue agency operating with an unlimited budget and little oversight. The legacy of Project Azorian is, therefore, a dual one. On one hand, it stands as a monumental testament to American ingenuity, ambition, and technological prowess. The creation of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. And the Clementine capture vehicle was an engineering feat on par with the Apollo program, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in marine engineering and robotics. It was a demonstration of a nation's will to pursue a critical intelligence objective, no matter how daunting the obstacles. The mission did yield some valuable intelligence from the recovered bow section. Analysis of the two nuclear torpedoes provided insights into Soviet weapon design, and the hull fragments offered data on Soviet submarine metallurgy and construction. The remains of the 6 Soviet sailors were eventually returned to the Soviet Union in 1992, after the Cold War had ended, closing a final humane chapter of the story. On the other hand, the project is also a cautionary tale. It was astronomically expensive, and its primary objective, the recovery of the cryptographic systems and ballistic missiles, ended in failure. The ultimate public exposure of the mission negated much of the secrecy surrounding the intelligence that was gathered. The Glomar response it spawned has become a controversial tool of government secrecy, often criticized by transparency advocates as a way to stonewall legitimate public inquiry. The Hughes Glomar Explorer itself became a ship without a mission. After Azorian, it was mothballed for years. The fantastic manganese nodule mining story was, of course, a fiction, and no commercial company could find a use for such a specialized and expensive vessel. It was eventually sold and converted into a deep-sea oil drilling ship, a more conventional, but far less dramatic, second life for a vessel born of espionage. Project Azorian represents a unique moment in history, a time when the stakes of the Cold War were so high that a mission of such breathtaking scope could be conceived and executed in total secrecy. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a fusion of spycraft and deep-sea exploration that reads like fiction, but was chillingly real. It serves as a stark reminder of the hidden battles fought in the silent, crushing depths of the ocean, far from the public eye, where the fate of nations could hinge on a single, fragile steel claw reaching into the darkness.